How has it changed you to marry Linda?
How's it changed me? Geez, nothing much changes me, does it?
Paul Hogan's life often looks like a classic success story. A working-class man who created a single character and turned it into a worldwide phenomenon. Yet behind the laughter, box office records, and iconic lines was a deeply human journey marked by sacrifice, misunderstanding, and regret. His relationship with Linda Kozlowski became one of Hollywood's most talked-about romances, not just because it began on a movie set, but because it reflected the tension between love, ambition, and identity. What started as a dream partnership slowly evolved into a quiet heartbreak. Their story is not one of villains or winners, but of two people whose lives collided at the wrong moment in time, leaving lasting emotional echoes long after fame faded. A working-class beginning that shaped a legend. Paul Hogan's story begins far from red carpets or Hollywood studios. Born in Sydney in 1939, he grew up in a working-class environment that shaped his humor, values, and worldview. Before fame, he worked physically demanding jobs, including labor on the Sydney Harbor Bridge. These early years grounded him and helped form the down-to-earth persona that would later charm audiences. Hogan's humor wasn't polished or elite. It was familiar, accessible, and rooted in everyday Australian life. This authenticity made people feel like they knew him personally. Long before international recognition, he became a household name in Australia through television, especially The Paul Hogan Show. His success felt earned, not manufactured, and that authenticity followed him into every stage of his career and personal life, influencing how he approached relationships, fame, and responsibility. The determination to conquer Hollywood. By his mid-40s, Paul Hogan had achieved what many entertainers dream of in their home country. Yet he wanted more. Hollywood represented both risk and opportunity, and Hogan was willing to gamble everything on one idea. That gamble became Crocodile Dundee, a film he co-wrote and starred in, drawing heavily from his own humor and cultural identity. At the time, few believed an Australian comedy with a rugged outback hero would resonate internationally. Hogan, however, trusted his instincts. The film was not just a career move, it was a personal leap of faith. Its eventual success proved that authenticity could transcend borders. However, this same leap would also set in motion personal changes Hogan could never fully control. Linda Kozlowski's early dreams and discipline. Linda Kozlowski's journey followed a very different path. Born in Connecticut in 1958, she pursued acting with discipline and seriousness. After graduating from Juilliard, she built her foundation through stage work, including Death of a Salesman on Broadway and its film adaptation. Unlike Hogan's comedic rise, Linda's training emphasized structure, craft, and emotional depth. She was not chasing fame blindly, she was building a career. When she landed the role of Sue Charlton in Crocodile Dundee, it felt like a breakthrough she had worked years to earn. For Linda, the film represented possibility, validation, and the opening of a much larger world she was eager to explore. When two worlds quietly met. When Paul Hogan and Linda Kozlowski first crossed paths on the set of Crocodile Dundee, there was no grand declaration or dramatic moment that defined their connection. Instead, it unfolded gradually. Their on-screen interactions carried an ease that could not be rehearsed, a natural rhythm that caught the attention of those working around them. What audiences later recognized as chemistry began as shared humor, curiosity, and comfort in each other's presence. Yet beneath this ease lay a complicated reality. At the time, Paul was still married to his first wife, Noeline Edwards, a woman who had shared decades of his life and helped raise their children. This context added weight to every unspoken moment between Paul and Linda. Their bond did not emerge in a vacuum. It developed alongside emotional responsibility, personal conflict, and uncertainty. What felt genuine was also deeply complicated. The set of Crocodile Dundee may have been filled with laughter, but behind the scenes, emotions were layered and unresolved. Their connection was real, but it carried consequences neither fully understood at the time. Sudden fame and an unforgiving spotlight. When Crocodile Dundee premiered in 1986, few could have predicted the scale of its impact. What began as a modestly budgeted film rooted in Australian humor and culture quickly captured the imagination of audiences worldwide. The character of Mick Dundee felt authentic, charming, and refreshingly unpolished, and people connected to him instantly. For Paul Hogan, the success was both exhilarating and overwhelming. He had spent years building a career at home, but this was something entirely different. Almost overnight, he went from being a national favorite to an international celebrity, navigating a level of fame he had never experienced before. Linda Kozlowski's life changed just as dramatically. Trained on stage and still establishing herself professionally, she suddenly found her face recognized across continents. The role that opened doors also placed her under an intense spotlight she hadn't asked for. Every interview, appearance, and photograph carried expectations, not just about her career, but about her personal life. With fame came scrutiny. The media, drawn to compelling narratives, focused heavily on Paul and Linda's relationship. What had developed quietly during filming was now dissected publicly. Paul's divorce from his first wife followed, and public storytelling reduced complex human decisions into simplified headlines. Real emotions, layered histories, and private struggles were often flattened into romantic cliches. Fame magnified everything. Moments that once would have remained private were now interpreted, debated, and judged. Paul and Linda were no longer just individuals figuring out a relationship. They became symbols of a story the public felt entitled to own. That pressure, subtle at first, would quietly shape the years that followed. A marriage built on hope and momentum. When Paul Hogan and Linda Kozlowski married in 1990, many saw it as a natural extension of a love story that had begun on screen. They appeared confident together, united by shared experiences and public admiration. The age difference between them was discussed, but largely dismissed in light of their chemistry and visible affection. Paul, now firmly established in his career, approached marriage with certainty. He valued stability, loyalty, and creating a solid home. In the early years, their life together seemed full of promise. They worked on projects side by side, attended events as a pair, and built a home that symbolized success and commitment. From the outside, it looked like balance. A seasoned performer and a rising actress building a life together. Yet beneath that polished surface, subtle differences in expectations existed. Paul saw love as responsibility, showing up, providing, and remaining constant. Linda, still discovering who she wanted to become, hoped marriage would allow room for personal and creative growth. These perspectives didn't clash immediately. In fact, early on, they complemented one another. Over time, however, those differences became more pronounced. Paul believed security was the foundation of happiness. Linda believed fulfillment also required self-expression and purpose. Neither approach was wrong, but alignment mattered. Without fully realizing it, they were building a marriage on parallel tracks, moving forward together, yet not always in the same direction. Motherhood and a redefined identity. The arrival of their son, Chance, in 1998 marked a profound turning point. For Paul, fatherhood brought renewed focus and a deep sense of responsibility. At a stage in life when many slow down, he leaned in, determined to be present and protective. Being a father grounded him in ways fame never could. For Linda, motherhood was equally transformative. She devoted herself fully to raising her child, stepping away from acting without hesitation. At first, the decision felt natural. Parenthood demanded everything, leaving little space to question what had been set aside. Love, routine, and responsibility filled her days. As time passed, however, the quiet moments returned. With routines established and her son growing more independent, Linda began to notice what was missing. Acting opportunities had faded, and with them, a part of her identity she had worked years to build. What had once felt like a temporary pause now seemed permanent. She loved her son deeply, but that love coexisted with a quiet sense of loss. Creativity, ambition, and independence felt distant, almost unfamiliar. These feelings were not dramatic or sudden, they accumulated slowly, shaped by time and silence. Much of this inner conflict remained unspoken, not out of resentment, but uncertainty. Motherhood had changed her in beautiful ways, but it had also asked her to let go of parts of herself she wasn't ready to lose. And as those feelings grew heavier, they subtly reshaped the balance within the marriage, setting the stage for changes neither fully anticipated. The slow drift. No one talks about. Not all relationships end with raised voices or dramatic turning points. Some fade quietly, almost imperceptibly, until one day the distance feels too wide to cross. This was the case with Paul and Linda. From the outside, their life appeared stable and secure. They shared a home, a child, and years of history. But inside the marriage, something essential was slowly slipping away. Paul expressed love in the ways that felt most natural to him. He was dependable, consistent, and deeply loyal. Providing for his family, maintaining stability, and staying committed were, in his mind, acts of devotion. He believed that showing up every day, financially and physically, was the strongest proof of care. Linda's needs were different, though she struggled at first to name them. She longed for emotional closeness, for conversations that went beyond logistics, for encouragement to explore who she was becoming. The frustration she felt with Hollywood's limitations was real, but the deeper ache came from feeling unseen within her own home. As time passed, conversations grew shorter. Assumptions replaced curiosity. Each believed they were doing their best, yet neither fully understood the other's inner world. Silence slowly took the place of connection. By the time their son was growing more independent, the emotional gap felt no longer temporary but permanent. Choosing separation over disappearance. By the time Linda decided to file for divorce in 2013, the choice had been forming quietly for years. It was not driven by anger or resentment, but by a growing awareness that staying meant slowly losing herself. Leaving was not about rejecting the past, but about preserving the future. To the public, the announcement came as a surprise. Paul and Linda had been together for decades, their image steady and familiar. But to those close to them, the decision felt like the final chapter of a long, internal journey. Sometimes the end of a marriage is not sudden. It is simply acknowledged. The separation itself was handled with restraint and dignity. There were no public disputes or prolonged conflicts. Both approached it as a transition rather than a battle. The settlement allowed each to move forward independently, without ongoing ties that might reopen old wounds. For Linda, the most important outcome was not financial, but emotional. She spoke later about rediscovering herself, about the relief of stepping into a life defined by her own choices. Ending the marriage was not about blame. It was about recognizing that staying silent for too long can be its own kind of loss. Choosing separation was, in many ways, an act of courage, choosing presence over endurance and authenticity over familiarity. The aftermath of two different journeys. After the divorce, Paul and Linda moved forward in very different directions, each shaped by their own values and needs. Linda embraced reinvention. Away from Hollywood expectations and public narratives, she explored new ventures and built a life that felt aligned with her sense of independence. Her focus shifted toward growth, self-trust, and creating something meaningful on her own terms. Freed from roles that once confined her, she found confidence in quieter achievements. Her journey was not about reclaiming fame, but reclaiming agency. In choosing a life defined by choice rather than compromise, she rediscovered parts of herself that had been dormant for years. Paul's path was more inward. Though still respected and admired, his world grew smaller. Health concerns and external pressures weighed on him, and the absence of his marriage became more noticeable with time. In later reflections, he spoke with honesty about regret, not in accusation, but in understanding. He acknowledged that love, when expressed only one way, can miss the mark. Good intentions do not always meet emotional needs. With time came clarity, and with clarity came acceptance. Their story did not end in bitterness, but in recognition. Two people who once shared a life came to understand that love alone does not guarantee harmony. Sometimes, growth leads in different directions, and letting go, though painful, can be the most honest form of respect. A love story, without villains. The relationship between Paul Hogan and Linda Kozlowski is not a cautionary tale, nor a romantic fantasy. It is a human story shaped by ambition, compromise, and emotional evolution. Neither person failed. They simply changed. What began as a spark on a movie set became a marriage, a family, and ultimately a lesson in the complexity of love. Their journey reminds us that even the most admired partnerships can struggle when identities shift and communication fades. In the end, their story resonates not because of fame, but because of its honesty. It reflects how love can be genuine and still not last, how sacrifice can be sincere and still unsustainable. And above all, it shows that choosing oneself is sometimes the bravest act of all. Reinvention and independence. After divorce, post-divorce, Linda reinvented her life on her own terms. She moved between Los Angeles and Morocco, where she found love again and launched a tourism and film location business. She also invested wisely in real estate, turning her settlement into long-term financial independence. Away from Hollywood, Linda found fulfillment in building something tangible and personal. Her life after Paul reflected growth, autonomy, and confidence. She no longer sought validation through fame, instead defining success through freedom and purpose. Paul Hogan's quiet decline. Paul's path after the divorce was far lonelier. Though still celebrated as an Australian icon, his personal life grew increasingly quiet. Health problems, including muscle atrophy and chronic pain, diminished his physical presence. Legal battles with tax authorities further eroded his sense of security. While cleared of wrongdoing, the stress left lasting scars. Hogan became more reflective and vulnerable in interviews, acknowledging regrets about his marriage and emotional distance. Despite wealth and fame, he admitted feeling an absence that success could not fill. Regret, reflection, and public honesty. In later years, Hogan spoke openly about his mistakes, admitting that providing materially was not enough to sustain love. His reflections carried humility rather than bitterness. He recognized that good intentions do not always translate into emotional connection. These confessions revealed a man confronting the limits of his understanding and the cost of unspoken needs. Aging stripped away bravado, leaving honesty in its place. A bittersweet reunion on screen. In 2025, Paul and Linda reunited professionally for a remastered Crocodile Dundee release and documentary. For fans, it was nostalgia. For them, it was closure. Standing together again stirred memories but did not reopen old wounds. Linda had moved on, while Paul viewed the reunion as a final reflection on a life-defining chapter. Their son Chance supported the collaboration, seeing it as a healing moment rather than a romantic revival. Two definitions of happiness. Paul Hogan and Linda Kozlowski's story ultimately reflects two very different definitions of fulfillment. Linda found happiness through independence and reinvention. Paul remained tied to memory and regret, measuring life by what he lost rather than what he rebuilt. Their paths diverged not because love was absent, but because timing, needs, and identities no longer aligned. Their story serves as a reminder that even iconic love stories can fade, and that success does not guarantee emotional fulfillment.